Welcome to the prize briefing of the Central Command Team of Economic Freedom Fighters. I'm going to introduce to you all the leaders of Economic Freedom Fighters.
It's the 11th of July 2013. A conference venue in Johannesburg is packed with local and international journalists. A group of men and women wearing red military berets are sitting around the table to make a big announcement.
We took a decision that economic freedom fighters should be a radical, left and anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist movement with an international outlook that should contest election in South Africa.
I am Mpho Lakaje, and this is Africa Daily. Now, some of the EFF's leading policies include the nationalization of mines and banks. They also want land to be under state ownership, just like in China. It's a policy that has drawn sharp criticism, especially from parts of the white population who often accuse the EFF of targeting their private properties. Now, let me get into my conversation with the EFF's co-founder, Floyd Shibambu, who explained to me the basis of the establishment of his political party.
The economy still remains in the hands and ownership and control of those who controlled it before the end of colonialism and apartheid. And that economic emancipation should mean the reclamation of all the land, all the mineral resources, and the economic wealth that is still in the hands of those that benefited from colonial settlement and apartheid. Then what we then did was to say, this is a generational struggle, economic freedom in our lifetime as a generational clarion call. That is how the Economic Freedom Fighters was founded. But the agenda far precedes the formation of the EFF.
Right. And would I be wrong to describe you as a pro-poor, left-leaning, Marxist-Leninist party?
Yes, we are a Marxist-Leninist organization that is basically representing the interest of the working class, those who do not own the means of production, those who do not own the huge factories and businesses. We represent the poor. We represent the majority because majority in society are poor people here in South Africa. So we are an organization that is primarily working class based and has got aspirations of the working class. And to fight battles and struggles of the working class, you need ideological tools of analysis and guide to action. And then we choose Marxism, Leninism, and Fanonian school of thought as our tools of analysis so that we are able to properly characterize the class struggle which we say we are engaged in. And that is what distinguishes us, by the way, from all other political organizations in South Africa.
And in the context of African politics, what does a Marxist-Leninist model look like? What does it mean for the average Joe on the streets of, say, Ouagadougou, Kampala, Harare? What does it mean to that frustrated young person in Durban?
The poverty of our people, the unemployment, the joblessness of our people, the underdevelopment that defines our continent, the neo-colonial character of South Africa's economy, actually the entire African economy, is due to the fact that we pursued a capitalist route. So almost all liberation movements, particularly here in sub-Saharan Africa and in Southern Africa in particular, post-liberation, post the end of apartheid, they pursued a narrow capitalist route which had a supposition that you just have to include few black people into capitalism and then our problems will be solved. And that model has proven to be a total disaster and failure. Zimbabwe collapsed because of that attempt of just trying to empower the elite. Namibia is on the verge of collapse because of the same agenda. Botswana is trapped in a vicious cycle of underdevelopment, which is portrayed as if it's development because Anglo-American is benefiting out of Botswana.
But here's my question, Mr. Shibambu.
Yes.
Where in Africa has socialism worked? Give me a practical example of a thriving African state governed through a socialist system.
There has never been a socialist pursuit in the African continent. There has never been a socialist government in African continent. But what I can tell you is that all the pursuits of capitalism in Africa have dismally failed.
Then what
all
makes you believe that it's going to work in South Africa?
So we'll give you an example. So the scientific value and the relevance of Marxism-Leninism is demonstrated now with the countries that got to catch up with proper industrial development and economic development. If you check the People's Republic of China, which is led by a communist party, which is openly in pursuit of collective prosperity, you realize that there's never been an economic development model that got to be realized in a faster and speedier way that the People's Republic of China happened. If you know what the difference Vietnam
is,
as well.
You know what the difference is, though? China is homogeneous, definitely not as diverse as South Africa. Also, China is not a liberal democracy like South Africa.
No.
Have you considered those facts?
No, it's not true that China is homogeneous. It's not homogeneous at all. There are so many different ethnic expressions within the People's Republic of China. Actually, more than 1,000 different manifestations of culture and language and everything.
It's a dictatorship, though?
No, it's not a dictatorship. There is proper internal democracy that is exercised within the Communist Party of China, which gets to elect even the local leadership. Like if you have a party which has got more than 90 million members, there is no way that you can run that through a dictatorship. There is proper internal democracy that defines the Communist Party of China. Was divided in 1975. It crumbled in 1975 in Mozambique, but the Portuguese continued to control the economy of Mozambique, the banks, they control the major power station. Cabora Bassa is still owned by the Portuguese government, which is one of the major sources of power. The same applies to Ghana. Like majority of the strategic sectors of the economy are still owned by the British, despite the fact that Ghana was liberated almost 60 years, if not more than 60 years ago.
But then some people may argue that socialism failed where it was born in the Soviet Union because it's not sustainable.
No, look, what collapsed in the Soviet Union was not a Marxist-Leninist guided socialism. It was something called bureaucratic socialism, which was hijacked by an oligarchy, like a group of elite people who were utilizing state power for self-enrichment. Proper application of Marxism in terms of how it gets to guide an economy is what is happening in the People's Republic of China, where despite the permission of a private sector to thrive, to operate, the state is in ownership of all the land in China.
Remember this moment.
Honorable Speaker.
These are EFF lawmakers, Floyd Shibambu included, disrupting then-President Jacob Zuma's speech in Parliament. They wanted him to pay back the state money spent on the upgrades of his personal home in Nkandla in KwaZulu-Natal. That session descended into chaos, with the authorities violently throwing EFF members out of Parliament, a spectacle that got people talking. Mr. Zuma was later forced to pay back some of the money following legal action by opposition parties, the EFF and the Democratic Alliance. And in February 2018, he resigned as state president after intense pressure from his own party over numerous allegations of corruption.
We take full ownership, by the way, on holding former President Jacob Zuma accountable on the Nkandla corruption and the misuse of state resources for self-enrichment. And we take full responsibility for his resignation as head of state and president of the Republic of South Africa. So it was a decisive action that we took, and we are still proud. And it's one of the victories that we will never disassociate ourselves from.
And yet, today, you are very cozy with the former president. Your commander-in-chief, Julius Malema, even said a few days ago that Zuma must be pardoned and should not go back to jail. It sounds like a change of principle to me.
It's not a change of principle at all. We have always said that Zuma has received the harshest punishment of being forced to step down as a head of state and president before the completion of his term. There's no humiliation any human being can ever face than being recalled as a sitting head of state and president. So once we dealt with that, we're done with him. All this frivolity that is being played around to take him to prison, it's just foolishness.
He broke the law.
No, he didn't break any law.
He was in contempt of court.
If there was contempt of court, South Africa's jurisprudence and legal process is that you open a separate case for contempt of court.
And by the way, my question around former President Jacob Zuma is based on the developments of the last few weeks. South Africa's Constitutional Court rejected an attempt to overturn a previous decision by a lower court to send Mr. Zuma back to prison. It found that his early release on medical parole was unlawful. Mr. Zuma was jailed in July 2021 after he refused to testify before a corruption commission. But let's move on to other topics now. You are calling for an open border policy. What's your thinking around this?
EFF is a pan-African organization which moves from, I already said earlier that we're an anti-colonial organization. So anti-colonial organizations are organizations that oppose colonialism. What is colonialism? Colonialism is the breaking down of what otherwise is a unified continent into small unviable states and countries. So these so-called borders that we're talking about now were decided recently in the 1800s by a group of European elite which wanted to loot the African continent. They were drawn by Belgium, Germany. The United States of America was participant, Britain, France, Portugal, all of those. So these so-called borders are creations, are fictional colonial creations.
Fair point. You are trying to remedy a historical injustice. But here's the issue. Your commander-in-chief, Julius Malema, says foreign nationals must find creative ways to enter South Africa. Now, are you calling for Pan-Africanism or are you calling for illegal immigration?
No, look, I don't know what could be illegal immigration when people are visiting their relatives here in the African continent.
South Africa is a sovereign state.
It's a sovereign state. Sovereign state as per what? As the colonial borders. So like we do not ascribe to colonial borders. That is why we've got the EFF existing in Zimbabwe. We've got the EFF existing in Swaziland and its leading militant struggles in Swaziland. We've got the EFF existing in Liberia. We've got the EFF existing in Namibia. Has got even members of parliament in Namibia because we do not recognize these colonial fictions in terms of what has been created.
Your party has done very well in the last decade. 6% in the 2014 general election, 10% in the 2019 general election. You are one of very few political parties to show growth in the last national election. Where to from here, Floyd?
Look, what we had predicted when we started the EFF in 2013 is coming to fruition now. We had actually predicted that in the first elections, we'll get 1 million votes. In the next elections, like the general elections, we'll get 2 million votes, which we got 1.8 million votes. It's not very far, although there's like more than 100,000 votes difference in terms of our target. And then we had predicted that in the fourth elections, we'll get upward of 4 million votes.
I'm not sure what you are basing that on because most eligible South African voters, according to data from the Independent Electoral Commission, don't vote. In other words, they would rather stay at home than vote for the ruling African National Congress, than vote for the Democratic Alliance or your political party.
No, look, we're basing our prediction based on our internal strength. We know our capacity. We know what we can do. We know what has been the reaction of the people of South Africa when we grow the organization. But the issue of the electoral participation by the people of South Africa, those who are on the voters' roll and those who are not, it's not an anomaly. It's reflective of what happens even in the so-called established democracies in the world. The voter turnout has never been more than 50% of the population, if you gauge it properly. And those who vote represents those who didn't vote.
Right.
That is what it is.
Thank you so much for listening.